In May 2022, a new super national nature reserve was founded. It's just over 15,000 acres of this stuff, reeds and marshes stretching all the way to the sea. I'm Steve Dealey, this is Wild Walks at the Somerset Wetlands National Nature Reserve. A large amount of the reserve is this stuff. This is phragmites reed, or thatcher's reed, the kind of stuff that's used in old Tudor houses to thatch the roofs. As you can see, these are very long stems, and they contain on top these fluffy heads full of seeds, which are an important food source for lots of animals and birds in the winter. So when I said vast, these reed beds you can see really are vast. This one stretches for about half a mile or a mile behind me, and this is just a small part of the overall reserve. And areas like this were not regarded as particularly valuable, other than the value of taking these reeds for thatching houses. But in fact they're an enormously important resource for wildlife. They're full of wildfowl that navigate the waterways and small channels between the reeds. And they're also, these seed heads on the reeds behind me are a really important food source in the winter for many birds, many of whom will switch their diet from being on insects in the summer. When the insects are no longer available during the winter, then they'll switch them over the winter to seed heads and dine off these as well. But there's another really valuable reason for having these reed beds here, which is that they are carbon sinks. These take in huge amounts of atmospheric carbon and turn it into something else, something quite valuable. Hang on a minute and I'll show you. So this is the other value that reed beds like this bring, which is that with so much vegetation dying down, there is insufficient oxygen in the water to let it all rot. So gradually it beds down into this kind of thick black gooey stuff. Compress that down for a few thousand years as more layers build on top, and what you end up with is peat. Peat has been used for centuries as a fertiliser. It's often been used in garden centres for garden plants, which is, in my view, not the right thing to be doing with it. And it's also been used as cut and then dried and used as fuel. But when you do that, of course, you release that carbon back into the atmosphere, and that's why it's much better down here in the ground than being used for either of those purposes. What you see behind me is an example of the conflict in our wetlands. Because without the cutting of reeds for things like thatching of roofs, the waterway that you can see behind me would close over. It would just become choked up with reeds. And it's these waterways that are home to the wildfowl. There are ducks out there, there are mallard, there are gadwall, there are shoveler, and there are teal that I can see just by turning my head at the moment. So, do we cut the reeds or do we not cut the reeds? This is an example of nature adapting to a man-made environment, and if you now take that man-made environment away, you remove the habitat for lots of things that need to live here. And so we need a balance, and that's why you'll find the conservation organisations here are cutting the reed beds or cutting trails and tracks through the reed beds to keep that network, that patchwork of open water and closed reed bed that so many of the species that live here now rely on. Reed beds like this can support so much life. In fact, it supports one of Britain's larger birds of prey. There's a bird called the marsh harrier. It's got a wingspan of about 110, 130 centimetres, something like that. And it hunts exclusively, or almost exclusively, in areas of reeds like this. And I've seen them top over the side of one of the watery channels here and try and snatch ducks from the water. I've just seen one behind me over there. Didn't manage to get a picture of it, unfortunately, but there's certainly one flying around in the area. The other thing I've just seen is my first butterfly of the year. A small tortoiseshell butterfly just lifted off and flapped its way along the track here. So spring isn't here yet, it's still really quite cold. I've got my gloves back on and I wish I'd got my fluffy hat, but it's clearly not that far away. So to show the value of reed beds like this, in the reeds behind me are a pair of female reed buntings. These are a small bird, they're about the size of a sparrow. And they are reed bed specialists. You may occasionally find one in a back garden or something during a really cold snap in the winter when the seed heads on the top of the reeds are frozen solid. but for the most part this is where you'll find them. And there's a pair there, they're systematically working their way up and down the row here. They're pulling the small fine seeds off the head of the phragmite reeds and eating them. And this for them is a lifeline during winter months, because this whole reed bed is full of these seeds, so it's a complete larder for them and will keep them going, certainly in energy terms, throughout most of the winter. So in the watery area behind me here, there's areas where the reeds have broken down and been cut, leaving behind just the stumps. And in that area there are 3 snipe. Now the snipe is not the multicoloured bird of the Disney film. This is a small wading bird with a very long bill for its body size. And it pushes that bill down into the mud to search for invertebrates. But it's also superbly camouflaged. Until a snipe moves, it is almost impossible to see it in a reed bed like this. So the fact that these 3 are walking around is the only thing that's enabled me to find them. So I've reached the end of my day here in the Somerset levels. It's been a day of warm sunshine and freezing cold winds. It's been a day full of wildlife, and it's helped to reinforce on me what an important habitat this is. It's seemingly desolate, it's seemingly got no value at all, and why don't they pave all over it? Well, the answer is it is absolutely full of life, and if we were to lose these marshlands and lose the reed beds, we would lose so much of the colour that adds beauty and variety to our lives. This is Steve Dealey for Wild Walks on the Somerset Levels. Thanks for watching.